For decades, we were sold the idea that if one income is good, then two incomes must be better, because more money equals more safety, more comfort, and more freedom. Or at least that's how it was pitched. But the thing is, it never really worked the way it was advertised. Think about it for a second. Back when most households ran on one income, that income was stable enough that families could plan their lives around it. Housing, school districts, groceries, even college savings were priced around the idea that one person worked and the other filled the gaps at home. Then, slowly, more and more households added a second income, which initially was optional, like a bonus, something that could be saved or used to cushion life's surprises. But what we failed to notice was that while this was going on, the system was structurally changing behind the scenes. Today, for most families, two incomes are no longer a bonus, they're a requirement, just to stand still. And that is a trap in all but name. Econs 101 will teach you that when more money enters a system, prices adjust to absorb it. And it's hard not to argue with that when you look at what happened to housing, childcare, education, healthcare, and transportation over the last few years. Once two incomes became normal, the cost of participating in a quote-unquote normal middle-class life recalibrated around that assumption. Let me give you an example. Do you know that housing prices didn't rise randomly? They actually rose because families could now bid more, and landlords and sellers adjusted accordingly. Childcare didn't become expensive by accident, it became expensive because both parents were expected to work, so childcare became mandatory instead of optional. In many parts of the United States, full-time childcare costs as much as rent, sometimes more, and that is not an exaggeration. This reminds me of something. Remember earlier I mentioned that the second income used to be optional, but what I failed to mention is that once it became required, the system positioned itself to consume nearly all of it. For some perspective, imagine a couple earning a combined $150,000 a year. One partner earns $90,000, the other earns $60,000. That second salary looks like a lifesaver until you subtract federal taxes, state taxes, payroll taxes, health insurance adjustments, and suddenly that $60,000 is closer to $40,000. Then childcare alone eats $20,000 to $25,000 a year, commuting costs take another chunk, and work-related expenses quietly drain what's left. By the end of the year, you'll notice that the second income didn't create any freedom. Instead, it just paid for the ability to keep working. And just to be clear, this is not a budgeting failure. This is a structural trap. Another downside worth analyzing in this two-income trap is the risk. You see, when your entire lifestyle is built on two paychecks arriving on time every single month, missing even one becomes a financial emergency. And the thing is, the system assumes both incomes will keep flowing forever. But the brutal truth is, life does not work that way. Layoffs can happen, illnesses can happen, amongst other things. This is why so many households feel like they are one bad month away from disaster, even while earning what used to be considered a dream income. This usually influences their behavior because naturally, when money feels tight despite earning more, people compensate emotionally. You tell yourself you deserve convenience, nicer cars, newer phones, or a vacation because you're working so hard. This is what economists call lifestyle creep, and what psychologists connect to the Diderot effect, where one upgrade demands another. The house requires the furniture, the job requires the car, the schedule requires the takeout. It's hard not to argue with these choices in the moment because each one feels reasonable on its own. The trap only becomes visible when you step back and see the pattern. So if two incomes equals zero freedom, the next question, why does it still feel mandatory to earn two incomes? The short answer to that is risk management, or at least the illusion of it. You see, two incomes paint this picture of safety, but in reality, they increase fragility. For instance, a household that needs two incomes to survive has less margin, not more. Margin, by the way, is the space between what you earn and what you need, and modern families have been taught to erase that space completely. So by the time all fixed costs are paid, there's nothing really left to absorb shocks. This is why so many high-earning couples feel constant anxiety. Recall that Adam Smith once argued that wealth is not about how much you earn, but about how much you command after necessities are met. In modern terms, that means margin. Margin is what allows choice, rest, and resilience. Without margin, even a high income is just motion. You're running fast, but not moving forward. And that's why so many dual-income households feel exhausted instead of empowered. They're producing income, but not accumulating freedom.
Now that we've mentioned freedom, it's only fair to highlight that this two-income trap also reshapes family dynamics and mental health. You see, when both adults are working full-time, every hour becomes scheduled, optimized, and monetized. Time with children becomes something you manage instead of something you live inside. Meals become tasks, and rest becomes something you earn. John Maynard Keynes once predicted that rising productivity would give people more leisure, but what he underestimated was how consumption would rise to absorb every gain. Instead of buying time, we bought complexity. And complexity is expensive. It requires coordination, energy, and constant decision-making. When households become complex systems, they need both adults fully engaged just to keep things running. This is why stepping back feels impossible. The lifestyle is no longer designed to function on one income, not because one income is insufficient in theory, but because the structure has been optimized around two. This brings us to the idea of living on one income while earning two. This sounds extreme until you actually examine the logic. The goal here is math. If you design your life so that one income covers all fixed costs, the second income becomes margin. In fact, Milton Friedman famously argued that freedom is inseparable from economic independence, which means when your lifestyle depends on every dollar arriving on schedule, independence disappears. But when you build margin, even slowly, you create space. Space to say no, space to pause, space to think. And that space is what modern families are starving for, even more than money itself. Now, I know the immediate reaction is, that sounds nice, but it's not realistic where I live. And depending on who you ask, that might be true in the short term. But the deeper question is not whether it's easy, it's whether it's worth restructuring for. The shift we're talking about here is about alignment. It is about asking whether your spending reflects your values or merely your obligations. It is about recognizing that many costs we accept as fixed are actually choices inherited from social pressure. This brings us to the psychological side of resisting lifestyle creep. How can you resist getting that new car when you can afford it? How can you resist moving to that costly location when most of your coworkers are living there? How can you resist putting your children in that expensive school if your neighbor's children are going there? Wanting your life to reflect your hard work or new status is not bad, we never said it is. But you also need to realize that every upgrade increases the minimum income required to feel safe. Once you improve one area, everything else starts to feel lacking. What happens is that you think you're upgrading reasonably until the total cost locks you in. By the time you ask whether it was worth it, reversing course feels impossible. However, the good news is that when you see the structure clearly, choices start to appear where none seemed to exist before. Maybe it's downsizing housing, maybe it's delaying upgrades, maybe it's reducing commuting or changing how childcare is handled. These decisions are not easy, but they are powerful, because they move expenses from fixed to flexible. And if you ever wondered why older generations sometimes seem calmer despite earning less, this is part of the answer. Their fixed costs were lower relative to income, and that gap created breathing room. It's time to stop trading your family's freedom for a paycheck that is gone before it arrives. The two-income trap is real, but it is not permanent. With the right math, the right mindset, and the courage to question the default settings, two salaries can finally become what they were always supposed to be. And if this conversation touched a nerve, make sure to subscribe to see more like this. Check out our earlier video on why a $100,000 salary feels like poverty for more insights into how the system is structured to make sure you give everything back to it. Thanks for watching.